If you're a fan of gaming, this is the episode for you. Geekdom101 Podcast, Episode 7 from September 26, 2018. My old friend Mr. Eddie, the co-host of Pixels and Bits, my old video game podcast I had right around 2009, 2010. He rejoins me here to talk about the classic PlayStation 1 era and our memories of playing the PS1. We talk about games like Resident Evil, Tekken, Final Fantasy 7, 8, and 9, Bushido Blade, Metal Gear Solid, Moto, Tony Hawk, Spyro. Like, if you were around this time period, you're going to love this episode. And even if you weren't and you just love video games, it was so much fun. We also discussed the rivalry with Nintendo back then and kind of why Sony ultimately did the right thing with the PS1 and why the success of the PS1 is what even led to the PS5. Really good episode. I'm proud of it. So without any further ado, let's get to Geekdom 101 Episode 7, Original PlayStation Memories with Mr. Eddie. And welcome back to the Geekdom101 Podcast, and joining me, a reunion of sorts. I haven't recorded with this guy in about 3 years, but he is back. And those of you who have been following myself before Geekdom101, during the Super Friends era, you remember this voice very well. And those of you who are new may not know this voice, but you will by the end of this show. Old school people are going to be real happy to hear him on this episode. Please, even though I probably already introduced him in the intro, I'm going to record later, but whatever. Please welcome Mr. Eddie, the former other host of Pixels and Bits, to the Geekdom 101 Podcast.
Boy, Lee, I mean, it is true that, you got me started doing this. I mean, you found me on the men's room floor, right?
I did, bro. You were passed out. You were posing for the cover of Sickly Man magazine next to the toilet, and I found you there.
I mean, that was a gold star issue. I'll tell you that right now.
And you had a huge erection, too. Erection, while you were on
Erection.
And I stared at it. I even
You took photos.
We're already derailed, already.
You kind of went overboard when you took, the paper towel holders and you were trying to ring it on.
I tried it, but it was too large. It was too large.
And immediately your fans that have never heard me before are like, what the hell?
Too large and too disgusting. But unlike me, Ed, bro, I got a 1/4 inch. But anyways, we're already off the rails here. Well, I mean, Geekdom 101 Podcast, talk about whatever. So for those who don't know, Mr. Eddie and I recorded, I believe, what was the number of episodes we did for Pixels and Bits?
It was somewhere between 25 and 721.
All right, I knew it was somewhere in there, but basically, you're going to be a big hit, and I can already tell people are going to like this. For people who don't know you. But yeah, so Ed and I, right, years ago on the old Super Friends show, I brought Ed on to talk about video games. Actually, I think your first show, was the Saturday morning cartoons one. Am I right on that?
I think you are right on that one. I am like a big cartoon nerd. I mean, I love animation. I mean, even now, I will still if there's something new that I hear that I should watch. I don't even do anything about it. It's just I have to check out something new. I was told not that long ago that Ed, you really have to check out The Loud House because you'll love just the art style. Forget even the show. It looks like a comic strip come to life. So yeah, I have to check on that. So we used to talk back and forth in a wrestling forum, and you're like, you have to come on. You have nobody knows Saturday morning cartoons like you do around here. And I'm like, see, nobody wants to hear me talk. Nobody, who the hell wants to hear my opinion? And you're like, no, Ed, you got to come on. And then somehow you got me on, and it was way more fun than I thought it was going to be, and I way over prepped. I'm like, but I didn't get to talk about this one. It's like, no, it's fine. Just keep making dick jokes.
That's it. All that matters in podcasts. And then what ended up happening was we did a series of video game memory shows on Super Friends, and then we were like, hey, let's do a spin-off, and it was originally called Godlike Gamer, but then we were decided on a different name, so we went Pixel and Bits, and 79 episodes. I looked it up. 79. So there you go.
So we didn't get the syndication levels.
No, when we did, but barely. We barely made syndication. The syndication is 65. But now, for those wondering, the way the show is we would pick a game or a franchise and we talk about it, Donkey Kong, Sonic the Hedgehog, Turtles, Double Dragon, whatever. And we just reviewed, our memories of the game. That's pretty much what we're going to do here, except for on this episode, we're going to talk about the entire PlayStation 1 era, and this is because of the PS Classics. The PS Classic just got announced, last week. They're going to be putting games on there. As of this recording, we only know of 5 games, but they're going to be putting, I think, 20 games. So I figured it'd be fun to kind of go back and do a whole retrospective on our memories, because you and I were around not just when the PS1 came out, but before the PS1 came out.
I mean, for any listeners that wouldn't know, I mean, I think I was born with an Atari joystick in my hand. That was my first console. I did some Commodore 64ing, and I just, like, worked my way up from there. From Atari to Nintendo to Super Nintendo, and then from what we're going to talk about today.
Yes, which would be, would this be considered, like, is this 3rd gen or 4th gen? Because the gen, like, I guess, categories have always confused me, because different systems came out at different times.
Me personally, I mean, I'm sure, someone will be out there angry at this. I would call it 4th gen, because I would think all those, like, 2-bit systems, like your Atari systems and all that, that would be your 1st gen. Your 8-bit systems would be your 2nd gen. According your 16-bit system.
According to Wiki, it's 5th gen.
What, so what one did I miss?
Maybe they're counting, like, Commodore and shit.
Maybe there is one in there. Like, because I would be thinking, like, you have Atari, then Nintendo, Super Nintendo, then PlayStation era.
Yeah, because PlayStation was before N64. Like, right
unless
before.
They're counting, like, arcade games as one before that. Or, like, even, you're counting, like, you know what they're probably counting? If Atari's 2nd gen, then I bet you, like, those Pong systems were 1st gen.
Yeah. They're like the really obscure ones from back in the day.
And I will say Pong is still a fun game.
Absolutely.
Like,
there's always.
You hang out with friends, especially if you have one or two, and you're playing Pong, it is still just a straight-up competitive game. You can really get into it still.
Now, I will say this. For those wondering about the archives of Pixels and Bits, if you want to go back and hear all 79 episodes of the show, they are not all up because there was some problems with our host, and as a result of that, I think only a handful of episodes are actually around. The majority of them are gone. They've been taken down. They're gone. I have them, though. I do have them on a hard drive saved, thankfully. Thank you, Louis Olmos, for saving that for us. So if you would like us to re-upload those episodes, I mean, there's 79 podcasts. We covered GTA, Mario Kart, Battletoads, Max Payne, Mega Man, Sonic the Hedgehog. We covered a lot of games when you really think about it. We didn't even scrape the surface of all the games that are out there, but we covered a lot of the big ones. Streets of Rage, Shadowgate, Star Fox, Zombies Ate My Neighbors. Remember that episode?
I love that episode. I'm the one that pushed for that one. I pushed for some weird ones, though. I wanted to talk about Jaws and Carmen Sandiego.
Which we did, I think. We did.
Yeah, I think we did both.
Like, and then there's Dragon Quest, because you pushed for Dragon Quest, right? Real bad.
Oh, I pushed super hard for that.
Right. We did. We actually did.
What? That was our first 8-hour-long episode?
Almost. Well, Final Fantasy, it's funny, we did Final Fantasy, then Dragon Quest, then Carmen Sandiego, but you also pushed for, like, Adventures in the Magic Kingdom, which was a random one, but not a bad one.
I don't even know why I wanted that one so bad. I think, honestly, I probably just played it on emulator or something. I'm like, we should talk about this.
We did a 4-part Mortal Kombat retrospective. Remember that? 4 parts.
Yeah, I totally remember it.
Yeah, right. And we planned, you might not remember this one. Remember we planned to do like a 5-part Street Fighter retrospective too, and we never got around to it?
Yeah, we're going to have to get to that one day. We have to finish what we started.
Yeah, we have to get to 730 episodes before we die.
For any like new listeners, one of those running gags that we do have is that my memory is like notoriously bad when it comes to stuff I've done. Like it will be like, Ed, do you remember when you did this? I'm like, no, I don't remember talking about it. Like, Ed, it was 2 weeks ago. I'm like, yeah, I might have said something like that.
That's the way it is. Well, hopefully your memory will hold up here. We're talking about PlayStation now.
Oh, that shit I know. If it's not about me, I'm good.
Let's talk about the era. All right, let's go back. So, just to kind of paint the picture for everybody, for years it was Nintendo and Sega. Late 80s, early 90s, Nintendo and Sega were the 2 top home console companies at war. Now, Ed, there were other companies that came in to do game consoles that did not work out, and it wasn't entirely their fault. It had to do with there weren't enough good games on there. There was no third-party support. In some cases, there were good games, but just they didn't have the penetration. There's a word that Nintendo and because you know how it's like market share. Like you go to a store, you have Coke and Pepsi. Then you've got like RC Cola, and like most people buy Coke and Pepsi, but you've got that third one there that's still good, but and you of course have made it a habit of collecting all the Dr. Pepper clones.
I think I've gotten 2 down. That seemed like such a good idea when I started that.
Yeah. And then
That was one of those like grand ambitions. Like, this is going to be great, until I realized that unless I travel across the country, I'm not going to come across any others.
Nope. You would have to go everywhere. You have to leave America to come
And
here.
I'm never. It's dangerous for me to leave America.
It is. The oxygen levels are just not wacky enough nowadays, especially in this political climate. But either way,
But I think you hit it right on like the problem with it. I mean, there were like third party systems, but if you already owned one of the other two, are you going to try to buy that third system? Or if you have enough, I mean, if you're one of those random, like, I mean, I wish I could have avoided two systems back in the day. Are you going to go with the known quantity and get the one that you don't have in Nintendo or Sega? Or are you going to get, like, the TurboGrafx 16?
well,
Like, none of my friends had one.
no, none of my friends did either. Like and there were a lot. And these are by some big companies. Now SNK had the Neo Geo, which at the time was really for a lot of the hardcore enthusiasts who had money because the games were $200 a piece. Okay, none of us could afford that back then.
I didn't even know that existed when I was in, like, around that era. Like,
Well,
I
the
would
only reason I knew X is the magazines. I was big into the magazines.
That's true.
And then we had the Panasonic 3DO, which was a great concept, but it flopped. We had the Philips CDI, which was a decent idea, but the technology was bad and the games were terrible on it.
And
you
the
know,
controllers suck.
was horrible. But here's the thing, Ed. Okay, so you've got these companies. These are legitimate big companies. Panasonic, Philips. These are big companies that were known for doing stereos, TVs. Here we have Sony, who's known for doing stereos, TVs, coming into the game market. But one thing people don't know is that they were originally going to team up with Nintendo.
Yeah, absolutely. That's one of the things I like. I told you I was like messing around with notes earlier, and my notes are actually not here, so it was really worth me writing them all up. But it's amazing the history behind that. That originally Nintendo and Sony were going to work together. And look, I mean, I'm a Nintendo. I won't call myself a fanboy anymore, but I was definitely the kid that had the Nintendo, the Super Nintendo, the Nintendo 64, all of those. Nintendo fucked up. Like, this all falls on Nintendo.
Is it fair to say that after the PlayStation 1 and 2, that Sony was the only company to legitimately take market share away from Nintendo?
Oh, absolutely.
Sega couldn't do it. Sega did a little bit.
Sega did it pretty good.
They did
like,
a little
Sega,
bit, but Sony stripped them away to where people turned their backs on Nintendo during the PS2 era. Because I was one of the people who did it.
You know what I would say? I would say Sega went toe-to-toe with Nintendo, and I think it was like a 50% market share around there. But Sony beat Nintendo. Sony made themselves number one. They actually pushed Nintendo to number two.
Ed, in the history of video games, I think that's a big fucking deal.
It's a huge deal.
I think it's and again, it's hard to explain for kids because who weren't around back then. Nintendo was everywhere. There was Nintendo. You went to Toys R Us. They had a whole Nintendo section bigger than what you have now. And well, there is no Toys R Us, but huge. There was not just the games. You had the merchandising. You had the TV shows. We've talked about all this on Pixels and Bits. Captain N. You had the Mario Brothers show. You had all these things. You had the movie. Obviously, it was Nintendo. They were like the monopoly.
I mean, I ate the breakfast cereal, D. I mean, I was an ardent fan of the double box breakfast cereal where you had a bag of Mario and a bag of Zelda.
Didn't they re-release that recently?
Did they? I mean, they might have, and I wish I'd known because I would have bought a box of that and been like, oh, this isn't as good as I remember. But I still would have kept the box.
Right. Well, Sony comes
It even
along.
had like the cheat codes on the back. Like, they showed you how to do stuff in like Mario 2.
Yeah, no, you could cut it out. Yeah, no, I remember all that stuff. Yeah, you had Nintendo Power Magazine. Like, Nintendo was in control. So, 24 years ago, the system came out. It came out in September of 1995, a year before the N64. Now, it's interesting because the N64 was so hyped up in the magazines. This is the Nintendo Ultra 64. This is the big fish. And Sony PlayStation was around for about a year before it came out, but I don't know anybody who owned one during that first year. This is a system that picked up momentum afterward. What are your memories of that time period? Because here's the way I'm painting the picture, Ed. When you look at Panasonic and Philips, right, and Sony, when you look at the PlayStation, this is my reaction as a 11-year-old kid. I'm reading the magazines and I'm like, okay, this is going to be another 3DO. Like, it ain't going to be shit. It'll be just like them. They're not Nintendo and Sony. I'm sorry, Nintendo and Sega. Sega's got the Saturn coming out. That's what I care about, even though nobody had a fucking Saturn that I knew. And then the PS1 comes out, and slowly this was not an overnight success. This was a snowball effect.
And it was, we'll get to it later, like why it snowballed. But my memories were, I agree with you. Like, who the hell is Sony? Like, this is going to fail and fail hard. Like, who cares? I mean, I had my Nintendo, I had my Super Nintendo, and Nintendo 64 all the way. I mean, there's going to be a new Mario game, and it's going to be in 3D. There's going to be a Zelda game coming out, and I mean, everyone can laugh about it now, but Earthbound 64, my favorite game of all time, is getting a 64 game. Holy shit! I mean, that's a sale right there. Thanks for that, Nintendo, by the way.
Right.
Still waiting on that.
Well,
well, I know. Before anybody writes in, yes, Mother 3 exists. I've already played Mother 3. I know. But yeah, I'm not lying when I say that. I bought a Nintendo 64 almost, I won't say exclusively. I was hoping for like Mario and Zelda and all that. But I loved Earthbound so much, like, well, this is a no-brainer. I'm going to get the one that's going to have Earthbound on it.
That's right. And for me, it was, and I talked about this in my video on World of Geekdom, it was Final Fantasy VII. Final Fantasy VII was not the main reason, but a big reason as to why I bought the Ultra 64, and then it wound up being on the PlayStation. And Ed, that's the reason why I bought the PS1, was Final Fantasy VII, which I don't think is the best Final Fantasy. It's one of the most overrated games ever. It's a good game, but it's very overrated. But it definitely is a game changer, no pun intended, because it literally is one of the main reasons as to why people switched over to Sony.
I'm going to be a little bit kinder than that. I will say it's a great game.
It really is a great game.
But I do agree it's overrated only because some people have put it on the pedestal of the greatest game of all time.
Yeah, I don't think it is.
I don't think it's the greatest game of all time. But it's excellent. It's a great game. And you know what? When it comes out on the Switch, I'll probably pick it up again because a handheld version of that is going to be a lot of fun to play. But yeah, I think it's overrated only because it's the pedestal it's on. You can't see. You need a binoculars to see the pedestal that high.
Right. Now, before we get to Final Fantasy VII, I have a list here of some of the first-gen PS1 games.
Before you jump on that, Dave, I was going to say, you're absolutely right, though. Like, my memory is, like, almost the same as yours. There was two games that, I mean, I was Nintendo 64. Like, even as I'm playing Mario and all them, I'm like...
Because we trusted Nintendo.
We did.
Yeah.
I mean, I was like, no, this is still great. I mean, with Sony's nothing. But a friend of mine had a PlayStation, and he invited me over. You have to play this new game called Resident Evil. It'll actually scare you. I'm like, video games can't scare you. And I went over to his house at night and like, holy shit, wait, you can play something like this on your system? And then you look over at Mario 64 and I'm like, wait, you can play this on a PlayStation? I was like, no, that's nothing. Check out this one called Final Fantasy. And it's like, wait, there's movies in the beginning? And it's like, it
was basically like Sega CD except good.
Exactly.
Because Sega CD had a bunch of these like crappy like cinematic games where you had to push a button at the right time. With the Sony PlayStation, you actually had games. It wasn't a video game that was tailored for a movie. It was a video game that had movies in it to enhance the game.
Yeah, and it made the Nintendo 64 to me at that time. It felt like a kid's toy. Like, this is a real system, and this is a toy. I mean, to be fair. Ed,
we got to clarify, though. The N64 does have a lot of great games on it. I just want to clarify because people like to jump on
I was just about to
shit.
say that. No.
The N64
I was actually going to say that.
Too.
Nintendo, later on, I mean, look, what my favorite wrestling game of all time is on that. I probably put more time on No Mercy than I have with every other wrestling game combined. And I've put hours into the other wrestling games, but No Mercy, me and my friends would boot that up every single day. And I mean, don't take me too harsh when I say it felt like a kid's toy. Later on, I did appreciate the Nintendo 64. There's a lot of
what I think
games
you're trying to say is that PlayStation had the balls to be a bit more adult.
But
because remember, Nintendo in the early 90s had that whole controversy about the no blood policy. We'll do another show about that someday.
Oh, absolutely. But maybe I'm not being fair when I say like it felt. But you know what? No, I was a high schooler then. It felt like a kid's toy at the time, from the perspective of a high schooler. Like, wait, this one's got zombies, and this one's got cursing, and this one's got racing, and this one's got that Final Fantasy with like this really great, like, you know, quote unquote adult storyline. And over here, I'm running over here and collecting coins and throwing bombs. And that was too early in the system. Nintendo 64 did come into its own, and it became a great system, and I put many, many, many hours into it.
Yes.
But that night when I was at my friend's house, it felt like the Nintendo 64
it basically
was
it hit you. Well, I think what it was is that it hit you that there's another system out there that's not Nintendo or Sega, that might actually be good. That's pretty much what you're telling me right now, essentially.
Not just good, like, I have to own this good.
Yeah.
And we talked all the time on the old show that I was more of a renter. Like, I did not grow up, like, in the lap of luxury with a
Different
fortune.
era, for sure.
We rented a lot of games, but this was like, no, I need to somehow get my hands on a PlayStation because I have to play this.
No, and let's talk about, real quick, some of the early titles, because they really weren't impressive. So, some of the launch titles for the N60, or I'm sorry, for the
PlayStation.
The PlayStation, thank you. You had games like Ace Combat. You had a game called Jumping Flash, Destruction Derby. You had FIFA, sports games. You had Bases Loaded. Those are all pretty regular stuff. Jupiter Strike. Then you had a game called Battle Arena Toshinden. And this is one thing that really a lot of folks don't remember. Battle Arena Toshinden was the original 3D fighting game on Sony PlayStation. Before that, the only system that had 3D fighting games on it was a really bootleg version of Virtua Fighter on 32X and the Saturn. And the Saturn, here's the thing also, Ed, the Saturn has a few classics on that system as well. But nobody ever, Sony just gobbled it alive. But before Tekken, Toshinden was the game.
Oh, absolutely. I was going to say, the Saturn, like later on, we found out like it had great games. But the problem is, like you said, did you know anyone that owned it?
Exactly. And
I didn't know anyone. How could you know that there was good games on it if you never played them?
Exactly. And that's too bad because they couldn't compete. Now, going into 96, we then had the sequel, Toshinden 2. Then we had some other games. We had Darkstalkers, The Night Warriors. Now, one thing that they did on PlayStation 1 also is they had these really awesome arcade ports. They weren't perfect. X-Men vs. Street Fighter had problems. We talked about this before. But there were a lot. When you look back on the PS1, look at the PS1. There were a lot of fighting games on this system. You had all the Capcom fighting games were on there. X-Men vs. Street Fighter. You had Street Fighter Alpha 3. The PS1 version is still like my favorite. That's my favorite Street Fighter game. The PS1 version of Alpha 3. You had Alpha 2 also. You had, obviously, the Mortal Kombats were all on there. They had Darkstalkers. They had a lot of good, not great, but good and beautiful-looking arcade ports. They did a lot with the 32-bit. It's funny because 64 was 64-bit, but in some ways Sony did more with the 32-bit as far as like the 2D fighting game kind of look. And that's also not even including Tekken and the 3D fighting games,
Oh, absolutely. And no one's going to believe me when I say this. Those notes that I actually did take and I don't have in front of me.
Why do you not have them?
I have Street Fighter Alpha 3 listed as my favorite fighting game on that system.
That's my favorite Street Fighter game to this day.
Like, that is such a great game. Like, that is like you said, it's not arcade perfect, but it's pretty damn good. I mean, you know what one that nobody talks about, though? And I'd love to see it, make a comeback. One of my favorite PlayStation fighting games was Rival Schools. I played the shit out of that game.
That's another one. That nobody ever talks about that game, dude.
That had a great tag system.
What about Soul Blade? Now we have Soul Calibur. Soul Blade came first.
Yes, it did. I always felt that one felt a little too floaty for me.
Now, a couple other games that were big during that time. We'll talk about the early PS1 era. You mentioned Resident Evil, Tomb Raider.
Well, was Street Fighter the movie.
I actually don't hate that game, Ed.
It's not a bad game. It really is.
I kind of like that game. It's weird because I played that game on MAME on the emulator, and I was like, wow, this is kind of fun. I like playing that game. I don't know why it gets so much shit because the movie sucks.
Because the movie sucked. That's the only reason.
But you had Tomb Raider. That's another game. Tomb Raider 1, and then, of course, the sequels. Tomb Raider was another game that really captured people, not just because of Lara Croft's tits, but
that was a big part of it.
It was like a 3D version. It was like a 3D version of Pitfall Harry, except probably better.
Yeah, it was a really cool 3D adventure game. I won't say it was one of the first, but it had a pretty good storyline.
Well, it was one of the first on the PlayStation.
Definitely one of the first on the PlayStation. And it really created, you can joke about Lara Croft tits all you want, but it created a memorable character.
No, definitely. Absolutely. You can't deny that.
And look at what we have now out of Tomb Raider. It's all started with Lara Croft all the way back then, and they've morphed her into an amazing character now. But yeah, everybody was all over it, and it was huge then. And I'll be completely honest, as huge as it was, I never beat the original Tomb Raider. I never loved it.
Me neither.
It was hard as ball.
It was hard as fuck, but it was so unique. It put eyeballs in the system. And another thing, too, that people don't talk about, Ed, the PS1 had some pretty good PC ports, too. Like, you had Doom, then you had Final Doom. They had some pretty good PC ports. You had Hexen. There were some first-person shooters, the old-style ones, not the Call of Duties, but there were some good ones that came later that were on the PS1 that I thought were great. I mean, let's not forget, there's an awesome game called Star Wars Dark Forces. It's basically Doom. All they did was map over it with, like, stormtroopers instead of demons. It's awesome, though.
I mean, when you said PC ports, I was thinking, do you remember D? Wasn't that on PlayStation?
Glee?
Yeah, Glee. It was that point-and-click adventure game. Like you were, like, against, like, Dracula or something. You remember that one?
I remember seeing it, but I never played it. Never played that game.
I remember I played it and beat it, and I don't know why. But, yeah, it was almost like a Myst-style game.
Right. And so, okay, so Resident Evil was the game that got you on PS1.
Absolutely. Between Resident Evil and Final Fantasy VII. So those two, like, blew me away.
What else did you pick up on back then? Like, what did you... What other memories do you have besides those two games of the early PS1 era? I'm talking about, like... All right. So Final Fantasy VII came out... I want to make it clear for everybody. That game came out September 7th, 1997 in the U.S. It came out in January in Japan. Huge game. One of the biggest games of all time. Maybe one of the biggest... I mean, easily one of the top 3 biggest games of all time as far as what it did. Like, not best, but biggest. Maybe top 3, top 5 maybe, I guess you could say. Definitely one that put the place on the map. What else were you playing back then?
Now, see, that's the funny thing, though. I wasn't able to get a PlayStation until much later in the year. I didn't get one until, like, after Christmas.
That's fine.
Like, that was, like... So, I mean, by then, other stuff had rolled out. But you're going to laugh. I mean, 2 of the games that I have, like, the earliest memories of, because it was on... You remember the PlayStation came with the sample disc? And you got to, like, sample a bunch of games?
We're going to discuss all the demo disc stuff soon, because that's a big, big part of the memories of that era. But I do remember that, yeah.
Like, the 2 memories from that was Parappa the Rappa, and no one's going to know this one, was Intelligent Cube.
Intelligent Cube was a super hyped up fucking game, bro. I remember that game. They had commercials for it on TV. Dude, I think WWF had commercials for it, for Intelligent Cube.
No one I know knows this game when I talk about it. Like,
I know.
It's forbidden.
And I guarantee you somebody listening to this knows what you're talking about.
Well, someone is like, that's my favorite game of all time, you asshole.
It's not a bad game, though.
No, it's actually a really good puzzle game. I mean, it took, like, the ability of doing, like, 3D graphics and made a really interesting puzzle game out of it. I mean, it's not the best. I mean, it really is just box sliding. But it was a fun game. And, yeah, that one, believe it or not, that one has my memory.
It did. Now, also, there's a few other games, too. Like, remember Fighting Force?
Vaguely.
It was the 3D beat-em-up game. You would love it.
Yes.
Yes. Capcom. Yep.
You know what the problem is? I had Shining Force in my head.
Yeah, Fighting Force. Fighting
Force.
Yeah, that one, and then also they had Die Hard Arcade, which was good. Now,
I was going to say, that one plays like that, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. It does. Now, as far as the PS1 goes, the 2 things I think the reason where PS1... I want to ask you about that. I want to pick your brain about this. So, did you feel, looking back now, that the Nintendo 64 focused too much on making everything 3D, which is where I think games like Castlevania and Donkey Kong 64 flopped, and making everything like Mario 64, which is a good game, but I mean, I felt like they were focusing too much on that, whereas on the PlayStation, it felt like you had more variety. On the PlayStation, you had... Ed, there are so many RPGs, JRPGs, on this system that are legitimate masterpieces. Not just Final Fantasy VII. You had Final Fantasy IX. Final Fantasy VIII was okay, but not a match. You had Star Ocean, Xenogears. You had Wild Arms. You had Parasite Eve. There's a fucking... Yep. They combined Final Fantasy with fucking Resident Evil. What more could you ask for? There was fucking Star Ocean, Legend of Dragoon, Breath of Fire 3 and 4. And that's not including the remakes, we have to give them credit for this, of Final Fantasy 1, 2, Chrono Trigger, 4, 5, and 6 that were released as the Chronicles, and you remember the collections. There were so many RPGs. There were so many fighting games, 2D and 3D. There were so many survival horror games. We had Resident Evil 2, Silent Hill, Clock Tower. I mean, I felt like the PlayStation 1's library swallowed the N64s. But my question to you, I'm rambling here, is there something to that? Did the N64 try too hard to do this 3D shit?
Absolutely. I mean, just compare like one of my favorite Castlevanias of all time, Symphony of the Night, to the abomination that was the 3D version on Nintendo 64.
So,
and I tried playing that. Like, I wanted to like it on Nintendo 64. Remember, I didn't get the PlayStation till later on. Like, I really wanted to like this Castlevania. And it's like, and like, you're a teen, but you're still like at that age where you're not 100% sure. Like, well, it can't suck. It's Castlevania. I mean, it has to be good. Maybe I'm not doing it right. No, I was doing it right. It sucked.
Yeah, it sucked. But Symphony of the Night wound up being like the best Castlevania, like
One
ever.
of them, yeah. And it's simple 2D graphics. I mean, I'm not simple. It was very nice looking at the time.
Well, they started the Metroidvania thing there too.
Nintendo worried way too much about making everything 3D. And you know what? As much as I love Nintendo, that is Nintendo's biggest problem throughout the generation. And we won't go too long on this, but throughout every generation, they get an idea in their head and they just have to beat it to death. Yeah. Like Nintendo 64, everything has to be 3D. Well, this game doesn't really work in 3D. Everything has to be 3D.
At least we got Paper Mario.
True. Paper Mario was really good.
And and again, we did get Smash Brothers. I want everybody to understand, this is not a fuck N64 podcast. I love N64, no. But we're pointing out some of the reasons as to why PlayStation was. We're trying to figure out, me and Ed, why the PlayStation was so beloved and why Sony wound up becoming the king. And I'm gonna lay it out, Ed. It had better games, bro. It had more better games
and better games.
More better games. Like Nintendo 64 had let's say 40 classic masterpiece games. PlayStation had 200.
Yeah, PlayStation had a ton of classic games. And seriously, I mean, I don't want anyone to think that I hate Nintendo. I mean, honestly, anyone that knows me, they know that's a ludicrous statement. I still love Nintendo. I still play old school Nintendo games.
We're talking about what Sony did
I know, but
to win. We're analyzing the business here. What did Sony do to win, right? That's what we're talking about.
Exactly. Because I know you jumped in trying to, so that way nobody jumps on me on that. So I just want to make that clear. Well, but you know what? Yeah. A fan, my view is that a fan can point out errors, and that was Nintendo's error in the time, that some of the games really did suffer because they were harping on a gimmick in the same way like the Wii error. The game suffered because everything has to have this waggle. And it's like, Punch-Out works better without the... In fact, I'm not going to play without the waggle. Because you get an idea in their head and they hammer it in. And in the same way, they were very focused on one thing, whereas, like you said, you want RPGs? PlayStation. You want sports games? PlayStation. You want 2D fighters? PlayStation. 3D fighters? PlayStation. Horror games? PlayStation. And you can go on and on and on. They had something for everyone.
And they even had old games remade and re-released.
I mean, seriously, there was you could probably name, you said, there's so many great games. I bet you there's about 30 or 40 on that list that I never even got a chance to play. There was just too many to play. Especially when it comes to RPGs, ones that take 50 hours.
Yeah, that's my genre, but I'm telling you, obviously Dragon Quest 7 was on there. That was the only, and they had spin-offs too, but dude, Breath of Fire 3, I named them already, but let's talk about, real quick, Ed, Sony's attempt at doing what Nintendo did and actually succeeding to a degree. And specifically, I'm talking about two of the big game changers, Spyro the Dragon and Crash Bandicoot. Now, I don't know if I would say that Crash Bandicoot is as good as Mario 64, but it's a great fucking game. And it was their attempt at creating a mascot like Mario. It didn't work out because there's only one Mario. Mario and Sonic are in a league of their own. But the game was great. Spyro was that 3D. When I played Spyro the Dragon, I'm like, this feels like a 64 game on PlayStation. And it really does.
You know what? You're going to yell at me, and I'm sure some fans are going to yell at me.
You never played it.
No, I played them. I honestly didn't love either of them back in the day, and I've really never gone back to try them again. I was very off-put, even when it comes to, again, this is going to get me real hate.
Yelled at.
They can yell at me all they want. It's fine. Everyone, what was our motto back on Pixels and Bits? You like what you like. There is no right or wrong. It's just all personal preference. Even to this day, I'm not the biggest lover of 3D platformers. A lot, especially in that era, 3D platformers always felt kind of wonky, and for
Yes,
never had
the
like the best
camera
controls.
was weird. Yeah,
The cameras were weird. Mario, you jump and the camera moves on you. Although Mario did kind of get it pretty right. I mean, Mario's probably the best out of all of them.
Mario 64 was great.
But Crash Bandicoot, I found the screen kind of wonky. Spyro the Dragon, I found the controls kind of wonky because of that isometric 3D.
I liked it.
thing.
I like those games.
I don't knock anyone for it. I mean, it was, you know what I'll say? It's not my cup of tea. I'd much rather a tight 2D platformer instead of a 3D platformer.
All right.
And even today, I would still go with a 2D, which is great because now with Steam and everything, it's like the golden age. It's like the second coming of 2D platformers thanks to Steam and the Nintendo indie store and all that.
Well, I'm going to hit you with another game changer. All right, we talked about Resident Evil a little bit. We talked about Spyro and Crash Bandicoot, which even if you didn't like them, they were game changers.
They were great games. No, please. Again.
People love those games.
Let me make myself completely clear on this because, again, some new listeners may not know me. Mike's take on all that is you like what you like. Just because I did not care for it does not mean that I think it sucks. You can dislike something even though it is still really good. There's lots of movies that I will say is a great movie, but it's not really my thing.
Last Jedi's not one of them. But
some people do take it as a personal insult. Like if you don't particularly like this thing, you must think it sucks. And
no, but
that's not true.
Yeah, there's enough people that love those games, and also Crash Team Racing. You know, it was like their version of Mario Kart. Was it as good as Mario Kart? Probably not, but it was good. Now, Ed, I'm gonna hit you with another game changer. All right,
go for it.
Metal Gear Solid. This was a game changer. This, if there's a game that defines that defines PS1 as much as Final Fantasy VII, it's Metal Gear Solid.
Yeah, I mean that was not just a game changer, and yes, I do know it was a PC game sort of PC.
They took a franchise that was literally a B or a C franchise for years on Nintendo, PC, etc., and they turned it into one of the biggest franchises in the history of gaming because of that first game.
Well, remember, in America, we got like a really butchered version of it for the Nintendo. Like, it's way better in Japan. But think about it this way, and just to paint this picture for people who don't really understand how big it is. Every single game you basically played outside of the Metal Gear series there's one object. You're the guy, well, not every game, but in this style of game, if you're the guy with a gun, your object is to get from point A to point B, killing as many bad guys as you can along the way. It is Rambo all the way. There's so many examples of it, I'm not even going to bother listing them all. But, I mean, that was your thing. You're running and gunning from point A to point B. Now, here comes a game where running and gunning ain't going to get you very far. It is all about stealth and trying to slip by.
Right.
It was a complete genre change. Like, it was... I had friends that had trouble playing it because we were so hardwired back then that it really is like, no, you have to kill everyone. You run up and shoot everyone. It's like, no, that's not how you play this one.
No,
like,
you're right.
You're supposed to actively avoid.
And the storyline and the characters was incredible. What a great storyline.
Yeah, I mean,
and it touched upon like government corruption. Like it was for a game. We were all kids back then. But that game really touched on a lot of really, especially the sequels, really interesting, touchy subjects about conspiracies and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, it had a great storyline. I mean, it had a storyline that you didn't see in other games. I mean, but Kojima always did stuff like that. I mean, he tends to be a bit of a storyteller.
I love that. Now, okay, a couple other ones now. We'll get back to that in a minute. But Legacy of Kain Soul Reaver and Oddworld Abe's Odyssey. I think these are... maybe not as big as Metal Gear Solid, but I think they were cornerstones of the PlayStation era.
Yes, definitely. And for a second, I thought we were going to be like two in the same genre, and it's like,
we've got to your point. We talked about Resident Evil. We've got Dino Crisis. We talked about Metal Gear Solid. What about Siphon Filter? I love Siphon Filter. I fucking love that whole series.
Yeah, I
played them.
I didn't hate them, but after playing Metal Gear Solid, it didn't feel as good.
Well, they were different.
I think I should have played Siphon Filter first. But I wanted to play it more like the other one, you know?
Yeah, but the difference is that they're different games, though, because Metal Gear Solid was a top-down view, where for the most part, whereas Siphon Filter, you were behind the guy. So it was actually... I don't compare them because...
controlled different.
Yeah, but I like that because it's more realistic to be behind the guy because you can't see what's up front. So when you're going around the corners... and that's the one thing that doesn't annoy me about that game is you get caught way too many times, you fuck up too many times, but still... you know, like... And let's not forget, we didn't even talk about this one, Ed. Mega Man X3, X4, X5, Mega Man 8. The 2D platformers on PlayStation 1, dude. They were great.
Hold on. If I don't do it, people will be angry. jump, slide,
jump.
Somebody will be angry if I don't do that.
Yeah, that's another one. Oh, and another one I didn't even mention.
But you know what? Mega Man 8, even though the cutscenes are hilarious, you have to stop Dr. Wily. I mean,
I will show you no mercy. Now get ready.
They're hilarious. They're the fucking best. But even though it does get a lot of like flack because of those terrible cutscenes, it is a solid Mega Man game. It is a more than solid Mega Man game. It's just that unfortunately, you have Elmer Fudd as Dr. Wily, and like you said, the cutscenes were. How did it go? It's like, Baz, we don't have to fight each other.
It was bad. It was some bad dubbing.
And it was like, I think they recorded in like a bathroom because it had that echo too.
Yeah. Oh, man. So what do you think about Legacy of Kain, Soul Reaver, and Oddworld 8? Did you play those games?
I did. I mean, they were not like top tier for me because everybody has the genres that they like. But Abe's Odyssey was a great style game, and I mean the other one was like. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, because I don't want to make a fool of myself. Because that one, Kane, I did not play as much. That was more of a hack and slash style, correct?
It was sort of like a precursor to what God of War. It was very similar to God of War. Very similar.
So that is the one I want to make sure I had it right.
Yeah,
I played
and you have
through
to find keys and yeah. They're fun.
It was one of those ones that I rented and played through and enjoyed, but it didn't enter my collection.
All right, now here's one that I don't think you were a big fan of, but it was actually the highest selling game in PlayStation 1. Gran Turismo. Gran Turismo was massive, dude.
Another one that I played. I mean, again.
Oh, I didn't know you played that game.
Yeah, I mean, I was a renter. I told you that. I rented so many games. Yeah. So, like, there are certain games that, like, stick out. Like, I own Mega Man 8. Like, that one I owned a copy of. Like, Symphony of the Night I own. Resident Evil I own. But many of the games that you named, like, I definitely played. And the memories are there, but I don't have that same attachment as if I owned it where, again, to put people back in the mind, when you were a person that didn't own 1,000 games, the few games that you owned, you knew those games inside and out. Like, you played those games so many times because that's what you had. So, I mean, there's certain ones, like Resident Evil, I could tell you, like, from beginning to end, and Resident Evil 2 even more so, whereas something like Kane, it's like, yeah, I definitely played it, but could I tell you, like, everything about it? No, those memories have drifted off. But it was a fun game at the time. And the same thing with Gran Turismo. It is a really fun racing game, and it has gotten better over time, but that was never in my collection.
Yeah, but it's still one that was, I mean, dude, it's the highest selling PS1 game ever. That car modification shit was huge back then. In fact, I'm pretty sure that the sequel was one of the launch titles for PS2. Gran Turismo 2 was a PS2 game, I think. Maybe it was 3. I don't remember.
Rightfully so, because it does scratch an itch that, let's face it, other systems weren't scratching. I mean, if this was something you liked, this is it. This is everything you could possibly. I mean, look at it this way. I mean, at how much.
And also, just to add to what you're saying, the memory card aspect of things, you could buy multiple memory cards and create so many custom cars. And this actually would also apply to the wrestling games on PS1, which we're going to get to shortly here. Is that, the sports games, you could save. Obviously, as you remember, Ed, when you played a sports game, it ate up the entire memory card. All 15 slots were gone. But,
yeah, seriously.
Right, it was bullshit. But you could buy, with the multiple memory cards, you could do so many things that were... Because the 64 and the Super Nintendo all have limited space as to how many save games you could have. But with a memory card, you could have tons of save space, and you can take the memory card to your friend's house, not the whole game, if he already has the game.
Memory cards felt weird at the time, but looking back at it, yeah. Of course, because you just saved the game to the game. I mean, that's how it's supposed to go. But looking back at it, it's a brilliant feature. I mean, not only did it work really well and it solved the problem, but also they got extra money out of you because you needed. I mean, if you want to play almost any of these games, you needed to shell out. What would you say? What was it, about $30 then?
That's right. And for the RPGs, yeah, you're right. And all these games, like Resident Evil, all of them, yeah, all of them.
Did you ever get one of those bootleg memory cards though that had like 9 different memory cards in one?
Yes, I still have
one. They
did
did not work great.
No,
mine worked okay, but it did not work great.
Mine worked okay. It never crashed me, but I had a friend of mine that had like 100 of them built into it, and it didn't work. Not very good.
Mine had 7 layers, and it's like it worked well enough, but it would like slow down like when it was saving, and you held your breath because it's like, is it going to do it? Now, it's just taking way longer than it should.
Another genre that I think kind of blew up on the PS1, PS1 really laid the groundwork for stuff like survival horror, because we had seen those kind of games before, like Shadowgate is kind of survival horror, but not really. It's more like just a point and click adventure. But the PS1 made them like household. Now, there's another genre, and that is the genre of the turn-based strategy games. You had Final Fantasy Tactics, which was really huge. Then you had Vandal Hearts. Then you had Front Mission. These games are Front Mission 3. I mean, obviously they existed before, but they were big at the time, and they were awesome at the time.
I mean, yeah, I played the shit out of Final Fantasy Tactics. And again, that's one that I actually did not own, but that one got so many rentals. I did get to know that one.
You might as well have bought it, bro, honestly.
Yeah, honestly, I should have, but,
Yeah.
You're working a job and you're making like $5 an hour,
I understand.
Still going to high school, you do what you can with your money.
There's just so many games. Now, sports games. Now, obviously, you're not really too big on sports games, right, from what you told me before.
I like more of the arcade style sports games. I mean, I played the football. I mean, I had Madden, and NBA Jam was definitely my jam. Loved playing that. Once you got into too much realism, I started waning. But you know what? I will give you a sports one if you don't mind me jumping into it.
No, please.
You know what one of my favorite sports games were?
I have an idea, but I'll let you say it.
Hot Shots Golf.
Oh,
Hot Shots Golf 1 and 2. I love those games.
And there's also Hot Shot Tennis, which I like more than Hot Shots Golf. But those you put me onto those games. Was that PS1 or was that PS2 though?
Hot Shots Golf was definitely 1.
The first one. Okay,
yeah. I think 2 might have been PlayStation as well. I want to say 3 is when it went to PlayStation 2.
Yeah. Well, those are great. And also, I was going to say, one thing I miss about this era is this is the pre-NFL Madden Monopoly era. So you had different companies making different games. So you had Madden from EA. Then you had 989 Sports, which I love. 989 Studios. I have so many memories of that, right? So you had 989 Sports. You had NFL. You had NFL Game Day, which I loved. Great fucking football game. It's more realistic, but it's still it was very well done. I actually like the Game Day games a lot from that era. You also had, I never played the baseball ones, but you did have some fun. I actually played NHL Face-Off. I'm not even a hockey fan. I enjoyed that. But what about, and I think this is one that's so nostalgic for this era, Tony Hawk Pro Skater.
Oh, yeah, well, yeah. I guess that does count as a sports game.
It's borderline because, Ed, I can't remember a game like this before Tony Hawk. I don't think Skate or Die was even remotely close to this,
Excuse me, Skate or Die 2 was the greatest skateboarding game. Wouldn't that be crazy if I actually tried to do that?
Okay. Do you count Jet Moto and shit as a racing? Is Jet Moto a sports game or is it a racing game? It's more of a racing game, right?
I would say a racing game. No, Tony Hawk. I guess, you know what, for lack of a better place to put it, I mean, again, now skateboarders are going to be angry at me. So I've got PlayStation fans angry at me, I got Nintendo fans angry at me, and I've got skateboarders angry at me.
Wait, you telling me you don't like that game?
No, I love it. I just said, because I said maybe it's not a sport. I don't mean skateboarding, fans of the game. I meant actual skateboarders who are angry at me, because I had to hesitate for a minute. Is it a sport?
Ed, nobody skateboards anymore. Come on. It's 2000.
Are you kidding? It's I thought that was still cool.
I don't think so. I think you're stuck in the past.
I'm still practicing.
I don't think so, bro. Now,
but yeah, no. Yeah. Tony Hawk was enormous back in the day. You didn't have to be a skateboarder to find this game fun. Everyone. This was one of the ones that I think everyone played.
Everyone loved that game. Okay, classic. Now, let's talk about real quick some of the shortcomings of the system. Again, these are games that I thought were disappointing, at least back then. The WWF games, SmackDown 1 and 2 were fine. Not a fan of Warzone, not a fan of Attitude, not a fan of...
Warzone! Do you remember the cutscenes?
It was... Yeah. These were the early PS1 games. They had this Mortal Kombat style of up, left, square. But they were also on 64 too, so we can't say it's a PS1 exclusive.
No, it's not.
I did really like the SmackDown games though. Oh yeah,
those cutscenes. My friends out there, out in the void of the internet, look up Ahmed Johnson's promos for Warzone. It's the best. They are the best.
It is the best.
I am smiling so happily right now.
Now,
but I agree with you. Yes, Warzone. You know what? Warzone was cool because it was a 3D wrestling game, and there was nothing like that. And then it wasn't until you had SmackDown that you were like, oh, these games could actually be really, really good.
SmackDown, the SmackDown games were like the C4 games. They had a very similar, way of play.
My personal opinion on the two is I think No Mercy was way better.
Yes.
Only because it really, me and my friends had a lot of discussions on this. It strictly comes down to what you prefer, your style. Nintendo 64's No Mercy was a much slower paced game, and SmackDown was more arcade style, and it moved a lot faster. I like the slower, meticulous games.
And the creator wrestler in No Mercy was the best.
Oh, it was a fantastic.
It was great. Well,
so honestly, like I said, it really just comes down to, do you like the slower paced game or the fast paced game?
Some of the shortcomings, too, besides those also, in my opinion, were some of the first-person shooters. Like, for example, 007 on PS1 was The World's Not Enough. Nowhere close to as good as GoldenEye. I mean, they just, 64 ate them alive. That's one game I felt was a bit of a letdown. Some of the game show games I wasn't a huge fan of, like Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, Family Feud. I rented these games like you, never really purchased them. I love Knockout King, speaking of sports games. I didn't even mention that.
That was a fun boxing game.
Yeah, there were a few. Yeah, there were also Ready to Rumble boxing was great, but that was on both systems. There were a few games that I think Sony tried and for me it just didn't work out. Like they had Digimon games, obviously Nintendo had Pokemon that just to me weren't that great on PS1. Are there any games that you remember being very let down by on PS1? Yeah,
I think there was a few like right off my head. I mean, again, people might disagree with me on this one. And just to give you an idea of like what kind of bizarre gamer I am, I actually really like the Harvest Moon series. I started on the Super Nintendo to the point where I have Stardew Valley on my Switch, and I've put an embarrassing amount of time on it, I'm sure. I have not beaten like the game yet, but I probably put more hours than I should have into it. So Harvest Moon on the PlayStation, this is going to be it's not very good.
Did you ever play The Fifth Element on PS1?
God, I wish I did. That sounds amazing.
It's fucking horrible. It's atrocious.
This sounds like the greatest idea ever. Press X,
bad.
the Bruce Willis.
Also, here's another one for you. Do you remember Hooters Road Trip? It was a late game.
I do remember Hooters.
Yeah, it's bad. Also, here's another one. Mortal Kombat Special Forces. Not a fan. But here's another one.
Go out on the limb and say all of those Mortal Kombats. I did not like the Sub-Zero one.
I
did not like. I can't get into any of them. The controls suck.
Ed, what about Simpsons Wrestling?
Oh God, you know what?
We were waiting for that one, Ed.
Here we are. Let's put the cards on the table right here. All right. Good. You just want to get me going on this. That's why you did that one.
All right, I'm going to bring
First of all, any fans out there?
There's Simpsons Wrestling. There's one more, Ed. Star Wars Masters of Terras Kazi. It's another terrible game. But I thought it was going to be great.
You know what? That's nothing compared to Simpsons Wrestling. Mm-hmm. I throw Simpsons Wrestling out there, like when, because again, people may not know me. I am an enormous Simpsons fan. Like, I speak it like a second language. I've controlled myself this entire time to not just speak Simpsonsese. Because I know you can keep up with me.
Oh, I can.
But Simpsons, and I love wrestling back in the day. I'm a older on it now, but I love wrestling back in the day. So, hey, this should be great. Fucking shit. When people actually say to me, like, what's the worst game? E.T. was the worst game of all time for the Atari. And, Superman 64 was the worst game. The fucking Simpsons Wrestling. Yeah. Because you know what? Simpsons Wrestling not only was that bullshit of just slapping on an IP on something, so it's Superman 64 actually comes pretty close. At least E.T. is fucking playable. This Simpsons Wrestling isn't even playable. Like, you might as well just hand the fucking controller to a monkey and just let it slap the keys randomly, because that's all you're doing. And just praying something happens.
All right, I got one to top that one. It's not Star Wars of Masters of Terras Kazi.
You know what? I don't think we're being fair on that one. Before you give me that worst one, we should do a little bit about that Star Wars fighting game, because we didn't even mention it was a Star fighting game.
Yeah. Okay, so ass. Okay, on the surface, the idea behind this game is brilliant. You got Star Wars characters. You got expanded universe storylines, right? Like after Return of the Jedi. Cool shit like that. Man, does this game suck.
Oh, and you know what? It's all about the controls. It's 100% where they had the idea, like, what if we put all this expanded universe stuff in there? What if we put these characters in there? What if we have, like, special costumes in there? What about the fighting engine?
Yeah, who cares? That's,
the nerds will buy it.
And it's too bad because the potential. Ed, there's a game called Mary-Kate and Ashley Magical Mystery Mall. All I had to do was say Mary-Kate and Ashley.
Like, why did you look like? Did you go like Wikipedia and like worst PlayStation games?
Ed, I would never do that.
Like, holy shit! Like, what was this game? I don't know this game. Like,
Ed, there was that one, and there was Spice World as well. Very
you know
bad.
what though? I actually remember seeing Spice World at like Blockbuster and Hollywood Video.
Do you remember seeing South Park Chef's Love Shack? That's another bad game. And yet South Park on N64 was actually good.
What, the FPS, the first person shooter?
The 64 one. I liked it.
We can agree to disagree on that one. That one, I don't think it played well. Like, I think it could have been great, and I think nowadays if you tried to do it, it'd be a lot better. But I think the game did not play very well at all.
So you're saying Mary-Kate and Ashley's not that bad?
It was my game of the year.
All right, here, I'll give you another one.
I don't. What was the game? I don't know this game. Like, what did you have to do? Like, did you have to did Mary have to like?
You literally go around to the different stores at the mall and play different games, like gambling.
Oh shit! That's I want it to be like a murder mystery. Like Mary's like murdered and like Kate has to solve
it. I would love it if they had a child being murdered on a video game. That sounds great, Ed. Fuck.
That sounds great. What? This is like the PlayStation 1 era. You can be edgy.
It was very edgy. All right, I'm gonna hit you with one, Ed, that a lot of people loved and I didn't. Driver. It wasn't that fucking good.
You know what? It was good for the time.
I hated it. I never liked. We're agree to disagree. I never liked that game.
Fair enough. I thought it was good at the time, but then Grand Theft Auto came out. It's like, well, we're done with this.
It's just,
you know what? It's kind of like in the same way where I played Warzone. And then, like, I got, like, WrestleMania 2000, and it's like, well, we never have to play this again.
Never again. Yep. Bye. Now, how do you feel?
You're just taking it, like, flip it out the window.
How do you feel about Twisted Metal?
You know what? It was a fun game, but only when playing with me personally, only playing with friends. I tried playing the single mode, like the single player campaign, and it never really clicked with me. It's kind of like I don't really like playing Mario Kart unless I'm playing with friends.
It's more fun.
Like, it's way more fun. I mean, I could get into Twisted Metal, but only when we were playing like versus.
Now let's talk about. We talked about the games. Let's talk about like that era. Okay, like the CD systems were back. You know, obviously Sega CD flopped, but the demo discs. Okay. If you were a part of the PlayStation Magazine, you got demo discs, every month?
I think so. Honestly, I'll be honest. The demo disc I was referring to actually came with my PlayStation.
I'm talking about the ones that were around back then you get every month. Because every month they would release a new one. There was the PlayStation Magazine demo disc, and you had like 10 games that were coming out, and then you had like little mini movies, and it also came with like tips on current games. It was almost like a complimentary thing with the magazine, and it's just something that just doesn't exist anymore, Ed, because nowadays with YouTube and the internet, there's no need for it. But back then, you know, they did something Nintendo really didn't do, and that's give you a demos. Like that was so, there were so many, and this was something that I want to explain to people. If you were a PC gamer, this was normal shit. But for consoles, we had not seen that before. I remember the fucking Final Fantasy VII fucking demo game that came with one of these magazines before the game came out. And I remember, I played it after I actually played the game, and I remember the fucker had like the Leviathan spell way early in the game before you got it. I remember things like that, because they were unfinished.
I do remember like that. Like, I mean, I do remember the demo disc on that. And didn't 8 have like a huge demo one? Didn't that come with something?
8? I'm trying to remember. Because I remember that Final
Hold on,
Fantasy...
give me a second. Let me rack my brain for a second.
Maybe you're thinking that...
You know what it was? No, you know what it was?
Dragon Quest.
No, Brave Fencer Musashi. It came with that.
That's right. You're right.
It came with that.
You're right.
Because I actually own Brave Fencer Musashi, and you got the demo disc for that, and it got me really hyped for Final Fantasy VIII, which I honestly didn't love. I mean, maybe I should go back and try it.
It's not great, but it's not as bad as everybody says either.
But yeah, that's what the big push behind Brave Fencer Musashi was.
Yeah. No, I love Brave Fencer Musashi.
Oh, that's a great game. That is like one of those ones that nobody talks about, and it's such a fun game.
I love that game. Now, oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, that goes right there with, like, Rival Schools as a PlayStation game that nobody talks about, but I absolutely adore. Like, there are certain ones on there that are just hidden classics. But when you have a system that runs that long and has that kind of library, there are going to be ones like, wait, you never played this one? This one's really good. Okay,
well, how do you feel about Ridge Racer, Wipeout, and Need for Speed? Was that up your alley at all?
That's not how you say that, though. Ridge Racer! Okay, I believe it's how you have to do it. Yeah.
You're right about that, Ed.
I think that's required by law, isn't it?
Right. Yes, I'm sorry.
At least American law, definitely.
Yes. Intelligent Cube. I'm putting that in the Intelligent Cube category of, like, great games that nobody remembers except for a small number. Well, I don't know about nobody, but we certainly do.
Yeah, I mean, I think Ridge Racer was out of those were the ones that my friends did more than any other. Obviously, because I just did the sound effect for it.
I'm going to hit you with one now. Okay. Bushido Blade. Remember that game?
That was the one where you couldn't stab the guy in the back, right?
No, well, okay, yeah, there's two endings.
You lost if you stabbed him.
No, there's two endings. You can either kill him and you get one ending, or you run away and you get the other ending. It was just two different endings.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, yeah, that was one that we definitely played. You know what? It was innovative, but it does feel a little primitive.
It was innovative at the time, but I feel like playing it now, you get bored of it after like an hour. But it was cool. You pick a samurai, you pick a sword, and you can actually kill somebody with one shot, like a realistic fight.
Yeah, I mean, it was a fun game because of that. You know what? I think now if you set up something like that now, like you were hanging out with friends, like that seems like I mean, look at some of the party games you see, like on your PC, your Switch, and all that. That would be a really good party game because you just you put that out on the TV, you put the two controllers there, and how long do those fights take? Like a minute? Because, like you said, it can come down to one hit kills you.
Right? Yeah. No, it can't. And I love that. Like, because if you swing your sword the right way, you chop off somebody's head, boom, they're dead. Love it. I love it. Yep. I love that. Did you ever play a game called One? I'm sorry. Go ahead. What were we going to say? And then I'll tell you about One.
No, it's okay. No, I was just thinking like that would actually like hanging out with friends. That's a good game to just have out because that's almost similar to some of like the pick up and play games that you have now that you can leave out that are so popular. Like that would work really well now. One, I know One, but you got to give me something else to work with. Like One, I know I saw sitting on the shelf. I can see it sitting at Blockbuster.
It was the game about the guy you're trying to figure out what his identity is. And it's basically like, it's not a first-person shooter. I don't really know how to categorize it. How do I categorize the game? It's sort of like it's like a 3D platform shooter. Sort of like remember Jet Force Gemini? Or, no, Mega Man Legends. Remember that game?
I actually really like Mega Man Legends, and I know that's also controversial.
Yeah, this is like that.
I liked it for what it was, Mega Man Legends.
That's another PS1 game, right? I
never played... That is. It's also a Nintendo 64 game, but I played it on PlayStation. A lot of people... I can't give you anything for One. You know what? Now that you said it, I can picture the box. That's the one that kind of had like a barcode, didn't it?
The barcode, because you're trying to figure out who you are. Yes.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I have like no memories of that. But you said it's kind of like Mega Man Legends. That gets so much hate now. I mean, the core audience really loves it, but it wasn't a Mega Man game. But for what it was a really fun game with fun characters.
It was like
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it was like a side story. I mean, what would you even call it? I mean...
All right, if I'm going to put on my nerd glasses, it'd have to be like, it's an alternative universe where, Mega Man and Roll he's not really a robot and you're in this world that seems like everything's underwater except for certain parts of land and everything runs on power crystals and there aren't robot masters and it plays completely different. I mean, They could have put anything there instead of Mega Man. But it did give us Tron Bonne and the Bonne clan, which I love the Bonne clan.
They got over, bro.
One of the games, here you go. I mean, one that you probably know, a really rare one, The Misadventures of Tron Bonne. That was a fun game.
That was sort of like the Dragon Quest Tornico game. It's like these spin-off games that don't really get a big release for the hardcore fans, but nobody remembers them. Nobody even remembers the Tornico game. The Tornico game, the Dragon Quest Tornico game on PS1 is basically a game where You play as Talon Tornico from Dragon Quest IV, and it's what's called a dungeon RPG, where you do these dungeons, but the dungeons are randomized every time you play, so they're not the same every time. It's like a weird. I don't even know. I don't know if does that make sense? Like, am I explaining that correctly?
Yeah, I honestly don't. You just call them dungeon crawlers now? It's
Yeah.
almost like, I mean, if it's random every time, it's almost like a roguelite dungeon crawler style game. If I have my terminology right.
I don't even know. It's hard to describe, but the game was called Tornico The Last Hope. And like I said, you pretty much go through these dungeons. It's like a maze dungeon, but the dungeons change every time you play. Like I said, so that way whenever you play the game, it's not exactly the same dungeon over again. And that's pretty much what you do in the game. It's weird.
That kind of reminds me of another rare one. Do you ever play Azure Dreams?
I've heard of it. I never played it.
It's kind of a monster catching game, but it's also, again, a random dungeon crawl where, I mean, this was truly a dungeon crawl, because as you move through the game, like when you take a step, the enemy takes a step. You take a step, the enemy takes a step. So, you can attack, but that attack takes a turn. It's certainly not a top tier game, but I remember playing it, enjoying it, and I never beat it. It was one of those ones where you have to get to the top of the dungeon, but you have to get the escape crystal to leave, and blah, blah, blah.
Speaking of bad games, what about WCW Thunder? Oh, God, that game sucks.
Oh, that's not a good one.
That's not a good one.
You know, here's another one for you. You want bad games.
Uh-huh.
I mean, not. Actually, I did play it, but it's not looked upon finally in the community. Street Fighter EX.
I don't think it's that bad. Well, no, EX Plus. One of them I liked. I forget which one I played, but one of them
Probably EX Plus Alpha.
I think that might have been the one I liked. Yeah,
but I don't think they have a lot of love in the community. I think that's like the black sheep of the family when it comes to Street Fighter. It's outside of the movie.
Now, what do you think about? Here's another one. Remember, I played the demo of this game on one of those PlayStation Magazine releases. Remember fucking King's Field at all? Do you remember that?
King's Field. That sounds familiar, but
it's basically like Dark Souls back then, but actually shitty. It's like a first person. It's a first person sword axe game. It's not a shooter, and you axe and you chop dudes down like Hexen, but it's really clunky and ugly. Really bad game.
That one doesn't ring a bell, but there was a lot of unfortunately, like any system you're going to have like those clunkers. I got one that I think you have more fondness for than I do. Dino Crisis.
Okay.
I never could get very far in Dino Crisis.
Oh, I think it was hard as fuck.
Yeah, I mean, this was a game I wanted to like, but it was like, get past the raptor. You have to shoot the raptor. It takes your entire clip. Now you're out of bullets.
Yes, it was basically like Resident Evil 1 difficulty. You had to run away. Yep. Well, I love Dino Crisis. I actually really love Dino Crisis because I love Jurassic Park, and I love the idea of them doing a survival horror game like Jurassic Park. I don't know. It just hit with me. The first one. You know what I'm saying? And I love how instead of zombies, it's dinosaurs, which is actually scarier in some ways. You know?
I would agree with that.
I think
like you can run away from a zombie.
And the thing about that game that pissed me off, and we're talking about PlayStation memories here. I'll give you a memory. There's a trick in that game where if you beat that game within 5 hours, you get like a special ending if you do it the right way. I swear, Ed, I beat it in like 5 hours and 10 minutes. I missed it by 10 fucking minutes, and I repeated it over and over and over, and I could never do it under 5 hours.
Is it like I'm sure by now you've looked at the ending on YouTube. Is it worth it?
I'm sure I looked it up years ago. I mean, it doesn't matter anymore. I saw it already. So it's just, you know what I mean? Like, back then it was, though. Back then you had to, like... See, the thing about games back then that I miss, Ed, and we're going to wrap it up here in a minute, but one thing I like about games nowadays, dude, is when you buy a game, and again, I'm not going to go into a rant about microtransactions. We've done that already, but... you're not really getting the whole game.
But I certainly could.
Oh, but you got DLCs and everything. But it's not just that. You buy a game, you put it in, you gotta wait for the fucking update. It's like, you gotta wait for it to install all day. Back then, you buy a fucking game, you put the game in, you played it. You could 100% the game if you wanted to, but there was... That whole system of, like, doing 100% didn't really take off until probably... Grand Theft Auto 3, or maybe that whole thing with Metal Gear Solid where you have to take the dog tags, like that might have been like the first time we saw that, like to complete a game. Back then you just beat the fucking game. You didn't have to complete everything. And nowadays it's like they encourage you to put more hours into a game to get sometimes nothing, Ed.
Yeah,
You know what I'm saying?
Like I said, you could
yeah.
You could have me flipping out about the state of gaming nowadays with stuff like that, and it's too late in the episode for to flip out. We could do that another time, like what's wrong with that whole system. But yeah, I mean, it's almost like
it was so much simpler back then. It was simpler, is what I'm trying to say.
You didn't have to log in every single day to keep you addicted.
Yeah,
like you could just play the game.
Not just that, but you'd have to log into the internet because back then there was no internet on these games, so it wasn't like you had to make an account and it's just so much work. Back then, you put the game in, hit the power button, and you start playing.
Exactly.
And I like that.
Actually, I got another bad one for you though, and I can't believe we've waited this long for this one. Do you remember Bubsy 3D?
That's like one of the worst games. I never played it, but I've heard
been
told.
I rented that piece of shit. And this was after playing, like, Mario. I mean, everything you saw online about how bad this game is, I mean, I don't have to tell you about it. I'm sure everyone knows by now.
I've read about it. I never touched it, yeah.
It is as bad as they say. Like, imagine Mario, but instead of being able to, like, turn, you actually have to, like, and it's got, like, tank controls to turn. Now do platforming, you asshole, with it.
Fuck that,
like,
dude.
Seriously. And it's so sparse. Like, the graphics graphics don't make a game. We've said it before. But the graphics are terrible. It doesn't look finished. Like Mario has, like, for its time, it had like lush backgrounds and environments for its time. Bubsy had nothing.
You know what's another one that was a disappointment? Now you bring it up from what I'm gonna give you two games that I thought were gonna be great and wound up being shit. Parasite Eve 2 was fucking what a
couldn't get into that. Didn't finish that one.
No, I couldn't either. It was just. It tried too hard and took too long to get interesting. 1 is great. I love 1. 1 needs a remake.
1 is fantastic.
Yeah. 2.
I agree.
Evil Dead: Hail to the King. Okay, look, I love.
Yes,
dude, I love Evil Dead. I love the fact that Bruce Campbell did the game and all that. Fuck, did this game piss me off?
That game is. I got that game for Christmas one year because everybody knows those are my.
Tex.
What a.
Bro, Tex bought that game over to my house, and I hated it from the first 10 minutes of playing it.
I don't think I ever got past, like, the first couple areas of that game. It is so bad. And it's one of those Christmas memories where it's like, it's like Resident Evil, but it's, like, Evil Dead. And his voice is in the game. Ash Campbell's voice is in the game. Holy crap, this is going to be great.
Right?
Jesus, it sucked.
Oh, it was
bad. And even there was a button. That was the version that had the button that you hit to make him quip, right?
I think so. I don't remember. It's been
I'm pretty sure he cracks out one-liners by hitting like one of the L.
Well, I love how when you first turn the game on and you don't do anything, you hear him say, "Press the freaking start button." Like Bruce Campbell was awesome. It's just the game was bad.
They worried too much about making. They want. It was like we said before. They did everything right except the gameplay.
Yeah.
All right, I got a weird one for you before we wrap it up.
Yeah.
Because there's nothing else like this on PlayStation, I don't think. You remember, like, Monster Rancher? And you remember the gimmick with Monster Rancher?
Wasn't the gimmick that if you put in another game, you can, like, tap into it or something? Wasn't that the... Like, you could summon...
Yeah. Other monsters, yes. But it wasn't just games. It was, like, CDs.
Yeah, so if I put in my copy of, like... Jagged Little Pill by Alanis Morissette, I could pull out a dragon or some shit, right? Some shit like that.
And I think they were like pre-programmed for the CD, or there was some kind of information.
You know what that reminds me of? It reminds me of Lock-On Technology on Sega, where if you put in a different game, you got a different bonus orb level. Remember that whole thing?
Yeah, it's very similar to that. It wasn't a bad game, but I look back at it now. I think you could do something with that now. Like if you put that game on the Switch. The Switch has it has a camera. You do it, and you can scan, like, we'll say something like barcodes, or I think some game actually tried doing that with barcodes.
I think that's been tried already, yeah.
You could just scan random barcodes, like, here's my bottle of water right next to me, you scan that, or my Yingling's right next to that, and you scan that, and you scan it, and that puts a monster in your game. As a handheld system, I think it would work so much better. And now because the problem with Monster Rancher was it was dull. Like, it didn't feel like there was something to, I played it, but you never felt like, you know what, it was the same problem that we were talking about before air, my problem with Pokemon Go. While the concept is sort of kind of there was nothing to strive towards. Whereas if you did Monster Rancher now, I think you could make it so there'd be an end game. Like, maybe there was an end game, but it wasn't anything I cared about back in the day.
Right. Well, a couple other ones, too, that just came to mind, too. Yeah, fuck that. Chocobo Racing, I didn't like it that much. Dragon Ball GT Final Bout was terrible. There were a lot of 3D fighting games that were very, very bad. I think Celebrity Deathmatch, I remember being another one of those hated fucking games.
That game sucked. I mean, that was another... I mean, unfortunately, any popular system is going to have that, but that was just a cheap cash grab because off like a popular IP. I mean, that's all that was. And it should have been...
How do you feel about Bloody Roar? Because that was another one that I liked it, but we haven't seen a sequel to that game since, the 2000s? You remember that game, right? Bloody Roar?
That was the fighting game with the animals, right?
Yeah, you transform into an animal, and then you transform back. It's called Beast Mode. It was pretty cool. It was pretty fun.
To be honest, and maybe, again, now I can... now all the Bloody Roar fans are going to be angry at me for this. It was just lost in a sea of 3D fighters that they had back then. It felt like there were so many of them.
There was a lot, yep. I mean, let's not forget, just lost in a sea of... Tobal #1. It was a 3D fighter combined with an RPG where Akira Toriyama did the art. I've talked about that game before, too. Very hard to find game. Toriyama did the art. Ed, it's basically like a game where you're... Like it looks like Tomb Raider, where you're running through the catacombs. Then it becomes like a 3D Tekken type game. It's fucking great. I mean, not a great game, but a great idea. The game was okay.
I don't think I played that one. Well, obviously, you said it's a rare game.
It's super rare. All right, what about the first Grand Theft Auto? Because that's really primitive compared to what 3 did. Did you play the first one? Because I did not play Grand Theft Auto 1 or 2 until later.
I never played it on PlayStation. I played it on a school computer.
Did you like it?
For the time, yeah, because I didn't know any better. It is very primitive compared to like what you have now, but it was so innovative at the time. Like, this is a game where, I mean, you got to think that you're in the school library playing a game where you're escaping cops.
Yeah, right?
Yeah, I kind of liked it. I mean, just because of what it was. I mean, this is a game that you shouldn't be playing on the school computer. And now you look back at it, it couldn't be any more tame than it was. But, yeah, at the time, it was like, wow, this is crazy. You're playing the bad guy?
Yeah.
Oh, I got one for you.
Yeah.
Well, finish what you're doing, but when you're done, I got
you
one.
Go ahead.
Because just saying playing the bad guy. You know what game I actually really... I mean, you know what? It's like... no, Tecmo's Deception.
That's right. Was that on PlayStation 1?
I'm almost sure it was PlayStation 1. I'm going to look. Yep, on PlayStation. I typed that one in real fast. Tecmo's Deception.
Yep, Invitation to Darkness or whatever, yeah.
I never played a game until that point where you played the bad guy. And
Splatterhouse is the only one that comes close.
So it came close, but you're still going after the damsel in distress, sort of, kind of. But I never played a game where you played as the bad guy, and I beat this game. This was a rental, but I beat this in this rental time. I bet you if I go back now, I'm going to be like, what the hell was I thinking? Like, it's probably going to be clunky as all hell. But I know I got way into it when I rented it. I loved the idea of people would come into my castle that you got to build yourself, and woe betide anyone that would be stupid enough to step and foot in my castle.
Right. Yeah. And they also, later on, there was Dungeon Keeper on PC that was kind of similar. Kind of. Not exactly, but kind of similar.
Yeah, Dungeon Keeper is pretty good, but there's a flavor to Tecmo Deception. Like, I mean, even the beginning. I mean, I even remember the opening cutscene where you were accused of a crime you didn't commit, and you're about to be executed, and you're praying to the gods of that land to save you. And nobody and it's like, you know what? If good won't save me, then I pledge my soul to darkness if that's what it takes.
Right.
And darkness saves you.
Yeah, well, no, that you're right. That's one that I totally forgot. There's also, wasn't there one called Midnight? What was it called? Nightmare. Oh my god, I played this game.
Was it Nightmare Creatures?
Nightmare Creatures. Was that on PS1? Or that might have been on 64.
I think that was a PlayStation 1.
Let me look it up. Nightmare Creatures. It was on PS1 and 64. Okay, so it was on both systems. Okay. Yeah, I like that game.
I think that one was good, but you know what? Now I'm looking at the screenshots. Yeah, I played this one. I didn't like it as much as like a Resident Evil style game because, again, once something becomes popular, a lot of people try to, like, hey, if it's popular, we can do it too, without realizing that it's really hard to make something that good. In fact, there was a lot of people that tried to copy Resident Evil's formula, and I don't think any succeeded except for one of my favorite games on PlayStation, Silent Hill. And I don't think it was trying to
love
copy
Spyro.
Resident Evil. It
No.
wasn't trying to copy Resident Evil. It was just trying to do survival horror in a different way.
Yeah, Clock
And
Tower also tried it.
I love Clock Tower.
I
Clock
like
Tower.
Clock Tower too.
Here's my thing with Clock Tower. It's a point-and-click adventure. It's not going to be anyone's top favorite game, but we rented it one weekend, and we played through it the entire weekend, and we had a great time around Halloween, and it was like playing a bad horror movie. And it was a lot of fun playing this bad horror movie. It's a good point-and-click adventure, but the story itself, it does come off like it's this cheesy horror movie, and that is so much fun to work your way through.
Agreed. It feels that way. Now, one of the things about this system that really became a big deal back in the day, before we wrap up here, was piracy. See, it was very difficult to... Nowadays, we have people doing it all the time, but to play a Super Nintendo game or a Nintendo game, to emulate the game on a PC is one thing, but to actually, like, make your own, like, homebrew was impossible. With this system, because of the CDs and whatnot... in fact, Nintendo was actually very public about this back then. They did not want to use CDs and DVD technology because they were worried about piracy. This was the first time I had ever heard the term mod chip or Game Shark, Game Shark or Pro Action Replay, like to play foreign games. And I did play foreign games with my PS1. I didn't even know what a mod chip was until the PS1 came around. And pirating these games and you could literally take, because this is when CD burn started being a thing. You could CD burn games. You could rent them from Blockbuster and CD burn them and get your own copy of these games. I'm not condoning it. I'm saying what you could do if you had a mod chip and play them as if you own them.
I mean, honestly, is the statute of limitations over on that?
Yeah, I did it.
That is
I'm not encouraging it, but I did it.
I mean, exactly. I was going to say the same thing.
I didn't do it a lot, but I did it. I did it for the foreign games.
I think a lot of people did it. I mean, it was
That's
something
what I'm saying. This
new.
is when piracy got big.
And you know what's crazy? You would think that would have really hurt the PlayStation, and I don't think it did.
Nope, it didn't. Especially when the PS2 came out.
Like, this is something that could kill a system, and somehow it didn't.
No, because but also let's not forget this, Ed. PS1 games were $40. They were fucking cheap.
Yeah.
There was a few that was more expensive, like the RPG. Sometimes you go up to $60. They were $40. So right now, for what you pay for a regular new game, you can get 2 games back then, and they were big. They were long games. So what games do you want to see on the PlayStation Classic? I've done my list already. I think you got to put. Final Fantasy VII is already on there, and so is Wild
Before we
Arms.
go down that road, D,
Yeah.
just so nobody just for completionist sake, you mentioned that. Maybe we could. There's my memory again, but you mentioned that that Nintendo did not want to do CDs, and in the end, that's what really bit them in the ass.
Because they lost Final Fantasy, they lost all these RPGs.
Exactly.
Dragon Quest.
I don't know if we actually covered that. No, because they lost Final Fantasy because of that.
And that's the thing is, we did. That was the whole thing. Dragon Quest was so big in Japan when they moved Dragon Quest and Final Fantasy over to PlayStation. That's why the Sony PlayStation blew up both in the US and Japan, because they had their games, we had our games on that system. And plus, of course, Biohazard, Resident Evil. They had the same stuff we had, but how culturally important RPGs are to them, they switched over.
Yeah, it was Squaresoft at the time.
And
they
then
pissed them off.
Nintendo comes out with Pokemon, and then they got a bunch of those people back.
They did get a lot of people back with Pokemon, but yeah, that was. You think about, how history could be different. If they decided to go with a CD-based system, Sony may not be the powerhouse it is now. Because Final Fantasy VII, I can't stress enough. We said it before, that was a game changer when it came to... people bought PlayStation because of Final Fantasy VII.
I'm one of them. And not to say it wasn't a good system before that, but that was the game, because Final Fantasy 6 and 4, 2 and 3 on Super Nintendo were so goddamn good that you had to get Final Fantasy 7. Plus, don't forget the commercials.
Exactly. I was going to say, D, I have friends that never touched an RPG in their life, and they had to play Final Fantasy 7 because of those commercials.
Yeah.
Never, not even Final Fantasy, just no RPGs at all, but they saw those commercials like, oh, I got to play this.
Yeah, what the fuck is this? Now, do you think that... people say the graphics don't hold up. I think it's still... It might not be on the level of, PS2, PS3, but I think it still looks fine for the era. There's obviously some blockiness and some choppiness, especially with, Final Fantasy and those games, but I think PS1 looks so much better than like Sega CD and the predecessors to it. Way better. It doesn't bother me, but maybe because I was around back then is why it doesn't bother me.
I can see why people think it's ugly. I really can.
Oh, me too.
Because, how can I put this in a nice way? Looking back at it, it's very, very blocky. Like, you can look at a Nintendo and a Super Nintendo game, but nowadays it's almost charming, that 2D pixel art. That 8-bit pixel art, the 16-bit. You look at the 32-bit blocky pixel, polygon art, it's not nearly as charming. While the 16-bit it's old, but it doesn't age. If that makes sense. Like, you can still look. I've got art up on my wall right now. I've got the characters from Earthbound right in front of me in pixel art, and they still look good. There's something charming. There's that cartoony pixel aspect. I'm never going to have the blocky cloud right in front of me because it doesn't look nearly as visually appealing.
No, I agree.
So I can understand. It was incredibly impressive for its time, though. Again, you can't stress.
And the gameplay was good.
It jumped. Just talking graphics alone, it jumped from that 16-bit pixel art I was talking about right to this 3D polygon art that looked amazing at the time. Like, I can't stress. People say, like, look at the jump between PlayStation 3 and 4. It's like, yeah, I guess it's something. The jump between the 16-bit era and the 32-bit era was incredible.
And then the PS2 was
even more
massive. Yeah, that was we'll talk about that another time. So let's wrap this up, man. Any final thoughts on the PS1? Your memories of it? Anything?
Well, you're asking me what games I'd like to see on the classic.
That too.
Well, I think I've shared all the memories I could think of at the moment for that.
We talked about a lot of them. Like, I would like to see. Obviously, I think Crash and Spyro getting their own releases, but Tomb Raider should probably be on there. We got to pick ones that people like. Maybe Gran Turismo.
Are we just going to assume no copyrights? Like, they can get anything they want?
I don't know at this point. I don't even know what the laws are on that. I have no idea.
Just for the sake of our discussion, just to keep everything honest, you want to just say, well, Capcom will play ball, Konami will play ball, all of them. We'll just assume that those people will play ball.
They still play ball with those companies now, so I don't see why not. So you got to put Resident Evil 2, right? Oh, no.
Yeah, I would.
No, because Resident Evil 2 is coming out again. They're re-releasing it. So would they put that on there?
Yes, because if they're going to put Final Fantasy VII on there, and you're going to see that on the Switch, I don't think they care.
That's never coming out.
No, that is. You didn't see that? There's a whole shit. You don't think they're coming? They announced like a shit ton of Final Fantasy games for the Switch.
No. I know that. I'm saying the Final Fantasy VII remake that they teased us with 2 years ago.
I don't know if that's ever coming out.
No, that's never coming out. Not at this point.
No, I meant the remakes. Not the remakes. I meant the originals. They're porting a whole bunch of them over to the Switch, and that's not stopping them from doing it on. Because Final Fantasy VII was one of the ones announced, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
7 and 9, but no 8.
No, well, why the hell would you do 8?
Well, 8's got a bunch of problems with like translations or something like that. They would have to retranslate the entire game, which I think they should do because you might as well just put them all on there.
I agree. For completionist sake, if you have 7 and 9, you might as well throw 8 on there. It's memory at this point. It's ones and zeros, and there's almost infinite space. Memory is cheap as hell now. You can get it on there. There's no excuse not to. Right. As far as space is concerned, let's see. I would want to see.
You got to put a couple of big ones and a couple of small ones.
Yeah, I want to see Symphony of the Night on there because that was a game changer on that one. I'd like to see Metal Gear on there because that was a game changer. Mm-hmm. I want to see Resident Evils 1 and 2. I think you can skip 3. I know I just said that you should put 8 on there, but I think 3 was great, but how far do you go then? I think you can just do 1 and 2 and be done with it.
Or you could just do one game per franchise. I would probably pick 1 or 2 if I agree with you on that, yeah.
I want to see 2 then, because they've re-released 1 so many times. 2 could be the one that you're like, well, I really want to play 2. Let's see what other games on there. You know what? Honestly, I'd love to see Brave Fencer Musashi on there.
I would too,
because that's a lesser known one.
Agreed. I want to see that Intelligent Cube game on there too. Because I think that's a good game to get for the system for the classic.
Yep. I'd like to see Parappa the Rapper on there, just because that was one of those ones that everybody played back.
He got shot as part of the East Coast West Coast rivalry. Don't forget that. That was one of the EGM April Fool's pranks. That's Jurassic Pork. That was a classic.
You know what? I know we did that episode. We could redo that episode about all the stupid bullshit rumors and April Fools and all that stuff. Because there's so many video game urban legends and there's so much fun that.
We did an urban legend show and we did a creepypasta show.
But we could have more fun with that. That is definitely one that part 2 could definitely happen.
Right.
Let's see what else on there. You know what? Honestly, just because I can't play it anywhere else, if they put rival schools, if they put rival schools on there, I would buy it. I would buy the classic just for that, just because I don't know where else, without getting an actual PlayStation and actually getting a copy of Rival Schools. I don't know how else you could play this game. I don't think
we
it's
know
out on
Tekken.
anything else.
We didn't talk about Tekken, Ed. Fuck, I forgot to talk about Tekken. Tekken's great. How about that? There you go.
Tekken is great. That was never my go-to fighting game. Street Fighter was always my go-to, and Mortal Kombat was kind of second because I didn't know any better. Because guys, hey, sorry, controversial. I'm really going controversial here. Mortal Kombat is not a good fighting engine. It is now.
Well, now, but not back then. We talked about that already once. Yeah.
Mortal Kombat 2, 3, Ultimate. You go back and you know what? Play them. The AI in that cheated like hell, and it's been proven that it cheated like hell. It was actually programmed to cheat, and they were clunky, and all the characters acted the exact same. No, Street Fighter was a much better engine, but I loved Mortal Kombat back in the day. I'd like everyone else. Tekken was fun, but I felt Tekken, since I wasn't good enough at Tekken felt too random to me. Like, I felt like I could just hit keys and, it worked. Just keep hitting these two, and I keep doing, like, that punch combo, and eventually something will happen. Mm-hmm. And I know there are Tekken fans that will be cringing at that, because I'm sure, kind of like Smash Brothers, where you can play that light, you can play that medium, you can play that hardcore. It depends on how deep you want to go into the engine. I'm sure Tekken was the same way. But since I never went deep into the engine, Tekken always felt
Especially now. Now it is more technical. Now, you could also
I'm talking to you first.
We could put fucking, I didn't even think of putting, like, Jet Moto 2. You gotta mix it up, because remember, there's gonna be 2 controllers, so you can put that on there, right? I don't see why not.
No, I don't see why not.
Put that. Maybe Tony Hawk. I don't see why not. Again, that's another one,
If you could, definitely. Tony Hawk, definitely.
And they should put Legacy of Kain Soul River, because God of War is a big title for them now. You might as well put what I guess is sort of the spiritual predecessor, even though it really isn't. What else would you put on there?
Silent Hill. I'd love to see Silent Hill on there.
I want them to make a new one, actually, but they never will at this rate.
Oh, well, unfortunately, we were close, and this is why we can't have nice things.
Yeah.
Do you know what one was popular?
I mean, Tomb Raider. They could put Tomb Raider 2 on there if they want, or Tomb Raider 1. They could do that.
It would honestly be a sin if they didn't have a Tomb Raider on there, because it was just such a big game.
Yeah.
Like, again, people that live now that didn't live to that era, I can't understand how big Lara Croft was. I mean, like, it was insane.
Did you ever play 10 Pin Alley? The bowling game?
I'm sure I did at some point.
That's a good one.
Is it?
Yeah, that's a great bowling game.
You know what they need to put on?
What?
I can't even. They got to put that Simpsons wrestling on, because the people have to know.
Mary Kate and Ashley shop at the mall.
Yeah. Put that shit on there. Let them know. And you know what? You can't play any other game on there until you beat this game.
They should put Austin Powers Pinball on there. That's an actual game, by the way.
Yes, it is.
That's an actual game on there.
I remember that one.
Austin Powers Pinball, bro.
Oh, shit.
Well, all right, we're going to wrap it up then. So where can people find you, Ed?
I'm usually on, like, the street corners on, like, Thursdays and Fridays. Nothing sexual. I just like to yell out my opinions.
Good. Well, if everybody wants us to re-upload the old P&B shows, just leave a comment over on the official page, Geekdom101.libsyn.com. Leave a comment on there and let us know if you want the old shows up, and I'll see what I can do to get them up again. I don't know where, but I'll figure it out. But I'm so happy to have talked to you again, Ed, and I definitely got to have you back talk about 64 when they do release that mini, which by the way, they got caught. I don't know if you heard, they got caught copywriting it, like the name 64 Mini. So we're going to get that. We're going to get it. You got to come back for that, Ed, so we can talk about the other side of this era, of Gen 5, according to them.
I mean, the sooner the better, D, because this was more fun than I've had in a long while. It's been way too long since we recorded together. We are stupid together, but I hope other people were laughing along with us at least.
I hope so, and I hope they had a good time reminiscing, on the memories of this era. Because I have fond memories of the PlayStation 1. I really have very little negativity. I mean, we talked about a few bad games, but most of them were amazing.
Oh, no, I agree completely. It was a happy era of gaming. At least, I mean, for me personally, it was a very happy era
Except
of
for
gaming.
Sega.
Yeah, sorry, Sega fans. It wasn't a bad system. It just didn't catch here in the States. No, I have so many happy memories. I mean, you can always nitpick about the bad, and it's always fun to point out games like Simpsons Wrestling, and it's always fun to point out the Mary-Kate and Ashley games. I mean, we can have fun with that. But the happy memories with the games, I mean, it felt like the future. Like, the older you get, the more disappointing it gets. Like, people are so excited for PlayStation 4, and PlayStation 5 will be out, and you look at it, it's like, I'm sorry, but I don't see a huge jump in difference.
No, I think with 4K TVs it'll look nicer, but the gameplay will probably be similar. Is what I'm thinking.
Yeah, but think about the jump between. I mean, just to put people in the frame. Like I started with the Atari, and the jump between the blocky graphics of that to character sprites that actually looked like characters in Nintendo was huge.
Yeah,
then you had Nintendo characters that went to Super Nintendo, and that jump was huge. Now look at oh my god! I mean, it's almost like playing a cartoon now. And then you had the jump from Super Nintendo to Nintendo 64 and PlayStation, and now you're not just trapped to this 2D environment anymore. Now these huge sprawling environments and games with such atmosphere that Silent Hill actually made you a nerd, and it was kind of want to play that.
You had that radio thing always going off.
Yup.
It was a creepy game, dude.
And actually,
Ed, the cutscenes back then were so primitive compared to how they were now, but it kind of made the game creepier. Like when you hear that old bitch turn around the church, talk about Samael and shit, like that game was. Well, we already reviewed that game, but it made the game creepier the way because it wasn't so clean. So it's like watching a movie on. It's like watching a movie on VHS on an old TV. Like it's scarier.
There's something
because
creepy about that.
Yeah.
I agree. I mean, that static sound, there's something hardwired into our monkey brains that's scary. There's I'd love to know the psychology behind it, why something like that unnerves us. But that's the whole thing with the fog. I mean, the fog, for people who don't know, just to throw a random fact out, they wanted to do the draw distance for the entire town of Silent Hill, but the processor wouldn't handle it. So, we'll put fog there, and that'll make it, that'll cover up the fact that we can't do it. And it made the game. The atmosphere behind the game is amazing, and that atmosphere couldn't have been done on the Super Nintendo. Right. And so, like I said, it was a time to be a gamer. Like, it really felt like you were growing up with these games. Like, the games were growing up with you, like, every step of the way. And PlayStation 2 was another huge leap. And that's why I said it's kind of sad now that maybe because we are older, maybe if you're younger, it feels different. Well, it doesn't feel like they're growing up with us anymore. Ed,
I think the big leap already happened. That Switch, because now we can take these incredibly looking games and take them on the road with us. I love the concept behind the Switch. Big TV or I'm on the road, small TV. The only con is that it only has like a 3 or 4 hour battery life. It's only been it doesn't last very long, but still, like I think that's the next big leap. Can you imagine if they had like a Switch type of system, but for these old PlayStation games? That's money right there. Have you seen that portable Super Nintendo?
I have seen the portable Super Nintendo, and I'm going to be a little bit like, you say like, I don't condone using a mod chip, but yeah, they already have a portable PlayStation. It's called a PlayStation Vita, and it's very easily hacked.
No, okay. I mean like
it's very easily hacked.
I've heard. I meant like an official capacity. That's what I meant.
No, in an official capacity would be great. But you're right. You know what? Maybe that is the next step in gaming, like that you can take it with you and you have a little bit more freedom instead of being trapped at a TV.
I love it. It works on a big TV and it works on a small TV.
I probably play my Switch more handheld than I do on the big TV.
I definitely do.
I admit that.
90% of the time I play handheld.
So, you know what? It will be interesting to see where it goes from there. But I just wanted to give everyone a perspective in case we didn't hammer it in home why this is such a big deal. Like, you can look back at it and say, oh, the graphics look like shit now. And it's like, shut up, kid. But if you grew up in that era, like, it was like the next evolution of gaming. Like, you can't stress it enough, like, how big a leap it felt.
No, definitely. Okay. Well, thank you, Ed, for being here, and thanks, everybody, for listening to this Pixels and Bits reunion. I'm sure we'll be back in the future, but we'll see y'all next week.